why we should all own silver, the rationale for it. Because if the government thinks it's that damn important to allow the commercial banks globally to manipulate the price for a reason, it tells you the importance of it.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics as we start off a new week in this hot summer down here in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where I am doing quality control pool and margarita testing in advance of Silverfest 2. Although, fortunately, taking a little time out of the pool to check in with Andy Schectman of Miles Franklin for this week's physical silver market update. So, Andy, it's great to hear your voice today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, buddy. Great to hear your voice, too.
Well, I appreciate that. And certainly, as we round out, we're in August now. It's interesting. We're getting closer to the debt ceiling scenario, which Janet Yellen, former Fed chairwoman, now Treasury Secretary, obliterating any perceived lines of denotation or boundaries in between the two, destroying even the myth that there is some independence between the organizations. But lately, she's been out selling the debt ceiling being a complete catastrophe if the people who are fraudulently running the U.S. government don't lodge their own constituents further into debt. In the midst of a hyperinflation campaign, while silver sits at half of its 1980 high. So, Andy, we see what happens on the contrived and highly distorted COMEX price, but what's happening in the physical market?
Yeah, well, as far as Janet, look, it's inflate or die, and so they have no choice but to acknowledge the debt ceiling as archaic. As far as what's happening in this sector,
Andy?
Yes.
Based on what you're saying, then, would you say that she is intentionally lying and giving advice that is intentionally designed to harm the people that she's trying to reach with it? Is there another alternate scenario you can think of?
No, I do, and I think it's in the same vein as the Fed coming out and establishing the permanent repo market when no one is even accessing the repo market, when it's $1 trillion a night going into the reverse repo market, when they have to at some point pretend that they're actually tackling inflation. They will roll out the repo market solution. Bottom line is that there's no way that they can ever normalize their balance sheet or rein things in without blowing up the whole system. So yeah, I do think she's just doing more Fed speak, wearing her Treasury hat, but certainly she learned an awful lot about Fed speak in her tenure as the Fed chairman, or chairwoman rather. In the physical world, I'll tell you that honestly, it's the best value that I've seen since February of 2020. For some reason, premiums have come down to a level that are the lowest I've seen in 18 months. And I guess that has a lot to do with summer, where people are outside, not paying attention to what's going on their computer screen, trying to get some sunshine and forget about the last year and a half or so of being locked inside. So this is
Andy,
typically yes.
Just could you give us a quick idea, maybe the Eagles or one or two products, so we could get an exact idea of what the premiums were and how far they have come in? Yeah,
absolutely. So let me grab that for you. So at their peak, the Silver Eagles a month or two ago were selling at as high as $14 or $15 an ounce over the price of silver, and right now those same coins have come down to, which is still pretty darn high, $8.75 over the price of silver. Pretty high. But I'll even give you a better example. We're running a special this week for your listeners on the 2021 United Kingdom Britannia, and we've been running that lately at $3.95 over. I'm going to run it for your listeners at $3.75 over. Those coins were $8 and $9 over most of 2020 and a good portion of this year. So while they're still roughly about 50% above where they were prior to the pandemic, they are as low priced premium-wise as they've been since the onset of it. So they are coming down, but ironically, getting product really isn't any easier, nor is the amount of buybacks that we're seeing. In other words, the secondary market is still void of product because really no one sells anything. And so I guess what we have right now is kind of the eye of the hurricane, if you will, kind of the lull where people were hopeful that life went back to normal. I think the second half of the year might bring realization that perhaps we're not so normal and we're not heading back to anything normal. And I think people will look back at these premiums and these prices and realize that it was really a darn good value. And I'm buying some for myself at these rates, and because quite frankly, I haven't seen anything like it since February of last year.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and something I don't know that I've ever heard anyone talk about or discuss before, so maybe this might be a good question, but I think we're used to talking about, well, the price could get hammered down, things could be manipulated, and the reasons why things have been how they have been, and perhaps it's good that there's skepticism. Why would the price of silver soar? Why would the price of any asset soar? But let's say for a second that the people that, like you and I, who think their prices kept substantially lower than what it otherwise would be in a free market, what if we're right? The price has been manipulated. It has been because there is a ton of paper supply, and the U.S. is bankrupt. They're never going to stop printing. What if we actually are right, and that is the case, and the CFTC has been part of a price capping operation, which their own acting chairman described in rather stunning detail, I thought, and that J.P. Morgan has been cheating, as the same CFTC acknowledged on hundreds of thousands of occasions. But maybe they've been cheating as much as some people think they have, and maybe Jeff Curry did lie in the face of changing the prospectuses. What if all these things actually turned out to be correct? Let's just give a hypothetical. Where would that leave silver? Because when I add that up, I know that I sit here and do a show talking about silver. I understand people are making investment decisions, and sometimes I don't always have to share every number because I understand there's some responsibility to things, but what if all of those things were not just conspiracy theories, but are actually turn out to be valid, which Bart Chilton pretty much confirmed all of them? Where does that leave the price of silver? Because if we're in a world where silver is half of its 1980 high, and Bitcoin, which was $1 at one point, is now a 40,000 bagger from there. It's a 400 bagger from 2013. So if every other asset, like Tesla stock, which I don't know, I heard they finally made an earning, but they've been sitting there, it was a 20 bagger almost since the Fed swap lines when they weren't even making money. So I get it, the silver numbers, because it's taken so long, you're careful with what you say, but any thoughts on where that leaves us?
Yeah, I guess I'd say in 31 years of business, Chris, the only absolute I've ever really learned is that markets go higher to the upside than anyone ever thinks possible, and conversely fall to the downside more than anyone thinks possible. I watched the Japanese Nikkei in 1989 when I started in this industry fall from 40,000 down to about 12,000, and still after 30 years of interest rates at or near zero in a country that once made better anything that had an engine or electronic component than the U.S. and were buying up most of the U.S. landmarks, I've watched that not even get back to two-thirds of where it was when I started 31 years ago. And conversely, a Dow Jones that when I started was 2,100 is now, I've watched it move up 15-fold. And the first person I ever heard speak at a conference in 1990 was laughed off the stage when he said it would go to 10,000. When you look at the amount of deliveries off of COMEX, when you listen to your Bart Chilton interview, which honest to God, I do believe truthfully, not saying it because you're interviewing me, I say it on every interview I'm on just about, is the most important interview for anyone who owns silver or understands commodities needs to listen to. I think when you look at the positioning of this big money and realize that they have been front-running what is coming a lot higher than anyone thinks possible. For me to pick out a number, I think is kind of crazy, but I would look at it this way. A lot of the pundits out there talk about gold going as high as 5,000 or 10,000 and then being used as a partial peg to a new world reserve, whatever that is. If Keith Neumeyer is right and it's coming out of the ground globally at 7, I don't know, take Jim Rickard's number of 10,000 or 15,000 and divide by 7. Could it go that high? Yeah, why not? Could it go higher? Sure. In a reset or a revaluation and giving real price discovery, real value to an asset that is so massively needed yet also massively undervalued. Everything you've been talking about, everything that Bart Chilton said to you, all of the movements on COMEX and in the London Metals Exchange, all of the things that we are seeing tell me that the price will go higher than probably even you and I would believe. And I say that with all sincerity. And that's why I've been buying it every 2 weeks for years and years and years and years, because not only is it wealth, but right now it's the single best value, in my opinion, of any asset class on the planet.
Well, let's put that to the test, because as you were speaking, it was reminding me of my misguided Wall Street days, where I know they're big fans of comparative analysis. So if we consider whether Bitcoin, according to me or anybody else, is or isn't an inflation hedge, but the fact that people are putting money into it, it is being priced, and I think the people putting money into it are looking at it as such, suggests, I'm not saying everything is all equal, but we'll just look at some comps. I mean, or we could even look at the gold market, but if Bitcoin is up 400x since it was $100 in 2013. And if silver to get to 1,000, that's only a 40 bagger. What if it matched that, let alone the 400 bagger, which I guess would put it at $10,000 silver? So how would you look at those? How would you rationalize those two? I mean, what? It seems like there's something that doesn't fit. Maybe there's one piece off. Maybe Bitcoin's too high, but what would you say? It seems a little odd that silver is still half of the 1980 high in today's hyperinflationary world.
It's completely odd, but I think the one symmetry, if you will, in the question or in the argument is in the finite supply. With Bitcoin, you have 21 million units. With silver, I don't know exactly. I don't think anyone knows exactly how much silver is still left in the ground or exactly how much is above ground, but I can simply assure you that the finite supply and the increasing uses in a world where it's so demanded in everything from military to communication to batteries to everything, water purification, solar, you name it, it's everywhere, it's needed, there's no substitute for it, and it's depleted. So how high can it go? A whole hell of a lot higher. And I also think it also explains why the powers that be have gone to such great lengths to keep that real price hidden from the rest of us.
Well, I agree, although what if you factor in that when I was talking to Keith Neumeyer about 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned how the Silver Institute numbers were showing that we've been in a deficit. So if the supply is 1 billion, industry's eating about 70% of that, and you have 300 million left over, well, if investment takes less than that, you're good to go. But once you run into an actual deficit, which the Silver Institute numbers show, I said to Keith that I see this last 2 or 3 numbers according to their figures, last 2 or 3 years according to their figures. He says it's been going on 3 or 4 years. There was another mining executive, I mentioned that too. He said the same thing, possibly even longer. So how does that resolve?
It results in a big problem in higher prices, and this is why they call silver inelastic. If it's needed in industry, doesn't matter what the cost is, they go out and get it. But if you look at the amount of demand in terms of investment demand, I would argue it's over the last year and a half been greater than the 300 million ounces that they're saying. So it results in, hopefully, in real price discovery. And that leads me to the point that you can only manipulate a market by pushing it in the direction that it is going. And for so many years, you know, before people like you were shining a light on what was happening in the silver market, silver was a forgotten metal where literally only a very small portion of the mined silver every year went to investment demand, the majority of it always going to industrial. And that is changing. There's a global renaissance going on right now where investment demand is, by Steve St. Angelo's estimation, has exceeded industrial demand for the last year and a half. In that environment, we get closer to real price discovery than people, I think, understand. And so when you look at falling premiums, it's really kind of shocking. in that, you could argue that we are deep in the eye of the storm and the trailing edge is coming. And I think that the demand for silver in a world where every asset class is off the charts overvalued, yet silver is trading barely half above those 1980 peak numbers, this is a deal of a lifetime. But in that environment where people are scrambling to get something and the price is manipulated, it's going to create a big problem, and you're going to see a war, if you will, between the industrials and the investors, where whoever can grab it will, and that's when you start to see real demand chasing a supply that is constrained, and hopefully we see some sort of real price, and how high that goes, I guess that remains to be seen, but I would argue higher than most people, and probably even myself, would ever consider.
Well, I could agree with that, especially because what you just mentioned reminded me of one of the things that I've realized why I really enjoyed option trading so much. Because, they tell everyone, all right, things go in bell curve, standard normal distribution, and that sounds great in the business school textbook, so you can get them in line, perfect Keynesian mindset to work if you're at Lehman Brothers or Goldman Sachs. But people are people. Things don't go in a straight line, and there's a reason that options are priced the way they are. So again, people can call it conspiracy theory or not. This is how we made a living and funded the cafeteria, by isolating these things in a trading standpoint. And when I think about the dynamics here, because it's really, to me, and why I focus, it's not like I'm trying to say it's manipulated and I have nothing better to do, but I felt that was singly what the whole thing comes down to. Because either if that's the case, A, that means that it's probably, if it really is just manipulated, and that's the only reason it's half of its 1980 high, well, A, that makes me think that, silver's not going to stop at 50 or $100. But B, if that assessment is indeed accurate, it also means you have a large element of fraud. And maybe to put that in perspective, imagine, and I can't imagine that even the U.S. government would do something like this, but if it should turn out that with some of the medical events that have happened in the past year, and that the advice and the things that have happened economically and medically, if it should turn out that people actually did things that were known to be harmful intentionally just to profit, I don't think that, I think it would be a similar dynamic where if it turns out that perhaps one way of financing that was through rigging financial markets, including silver, that's a big tree to stuff back into an acorn. And that's why I felt it was worthwhile to leave Wall Street and study these things. Again, I can't promise anyone. I don't have the licensed authority that an fraudulent institution like the CFTC does to give legal financial advice, but I can just speak for myself, because there are people who have asked me why I just walked away from a multiple six-figure income right as I was starting to get the hang of it, and why I would do that to struggle arguing for silver manipulation. Andy, I think I've told you, I was actually driving a taxi and Uber and Lyft for about a year, so a lot of people have thought that would be odd to walk away from all that to do what I've done, yet that's kind of how I see the skew of some of these situations, and maybe you have any thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that, while I agree with all of what you just said, I think the one piece that you add to the puzzle that kind of is the way that they're thinking, and I think about this a lot, Chris, and especially in the light of the interview you did with Bart Chilton, I think about it, and it's not a question of if the market was manipulated. It's more along the issues of why and for whom. And in that, I come to only one conclusion, or two, I should say. It's either done on behalf of the U.S. government or on behalf of the Chinese government in a broker deal. And I say that to you because, first of all, yes, they admitted to it, and JP did, and yes, they got a deferred prosecutorial agreement. But what is a $920 million fine to a company that on the same trading desk that was fined made $1 billion that same year, walked away $80 million in the black, and makes $1 billion a month in profit? I guess what I'm saying is, was it done to placate? Was it done to defer attention? Maybe, hey, they paid their fine, now everything's good, look the other way. I guess what I'm saying is it done under the guise of national security? Just like when they confiscated gold in 1933. That wasn't in the best interest of the public. It was done in the interest of national security. I guess all I could simply say is that the evidence to me points to the fact that the banks realized they were given a green or a get-out-of-jail-free card. And so while doing the work of some entity, which, I guess remains to be seen, I think they realized, well, let's do it for ourselves too. So I think you're right. It was done for greed, and it was just manipulated. But I think that was only a byproduct of the bigger ask, and that being they were asked, I think, from above to do this for an entity, for a reason, and would be given sovereign immunity, if you will, if the rubber met the road. So, maybe there are some traders who went rogue and did things they weren't supposed to do, and those are the ones that were indicted. But in general, I would argue that to be able to violate antitrust laws the way that they did, to be able to get a guy that was a former CFTC governor tell you these things are true, tells me that there was, and that it was a political decision to not prosecute at the time when he wanted to go after JP, that there's something bigger at play here, which only exacerbates why we should all own silver, the rationale for it. Because if the government thinks it's that damn important to allow the commercial banks globally to manipulate the price for a reason, it tells you the importance of it. And I think that's the most important thing, is to not get too bummed out about these prices. It's like going into your favorite store or going in to buy a new car, your favorite car dealership, and find that the cars are on sale way below what you think they should be valued at. You're psyched, you're happy, you buy it. Same thing should be true here. And I guess I look at what keeps me coming back and what keeps me enthused to talk to you and people on your show is that ask yourself the why. Why go through all of the hassle to do it when there's so many other ways that they can distort paper markets and make money? Why go through all the hassle to do this if it not for it to be something really relevant? And that's where I guess the only thing that I would add to what you said is I think it's done under the guise, if it ever comes out, of national security.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me, although I understand in today's world where some of the companies that get involved with the banks and governments also involved with the pharmaceuticals that do horrific things like putting fluoride in the water and otherwise. But Andy, when you said, let's say I agree, you said let's stick to the evidence. And when we consider some of the evidence that wasn't as widely disseminated in regards, for example, to Bernie Madoff, where a lot of the key witnesses were prevented from being tried, we really never got to the bottom of that. J.P. Morgan apologized. They were given a deferred prosecution agreement. By the way, they're on another one of those right now. I didn't know you could get two, and I think they've had several more. But when you look at the way the SEC, whose initial chairman was Joseph Kennedy right after his bootlegging and Wall Street fraud days, because FDR appreciated the campaign contributions, and also thought you need a criminal to know how to catch one, which could be true, but, is the obvious downsides there. But given when you look at that environment, how the evidence of the Bernie Madoff fraud was intentionally ignored by the SEC, and then the similarities, let alone that the same banks are involved or that the CFTC is, which had Gary Gensler now sent him to the SEC. You mentioned Bart Chilton's shocking testimony. Of course, let's not forget Rustin Denham, who confirmed the price-fixing operation. So when you actually look at all of the evidence, and then even for Wall Street, I understand it's hard to believe that the Wall Street banks could be involved in some sort of scheme to steal people's money, despite having done that repeatedly and in very synchronized fashion over the past 100 years, let alone days. I mean, it's almost like you could make the case, if one didn't know better, that it could be actually would fit the description of what's implied when you say organized crime, wouldn't you say?
No, yeah, absolutely, 100%. No question about that. And, look, I mean, the people that we talk to, Chris, are informed, and they're informed because of alternative media, people like yourself. And when you realize that, I just read an article the other. What I mean by that really is I read an article the other day that there are people lobbying for Jamie Dimon to run for president. So I mean, when you talk about how informed most people
stop it.
are,
Nobody is lobbying for that. Andy,
yeah, I read an article that I'm not joking.
In one of Andy, come on, stop, because I heard a couple of whoppers in my day. In one of Jeff Christian's recent video, he accused someone of calling him the most honest man in the silver industry and said that clients seek him out for that reason. Now, I don't think that's possible, or that someone could be advocating Jamie Dimon for president. So stop it right there, please.
I wish it weren't true. Any more true than, I read an article that they want to run Nancy Pelosi's nephew, Gavin Newsom, out for the Democratic ticket. So, I mean, look, we are in a period of time that's almost like the Twilight Zone. Yeah, well, it's the Twilight Zone. And I think that so many people have been dumbed down and refuse to accept information that is right there in front of them as being credible, and you're branded a conspiracy theorist when actually guys like Bart Chilton proved that we were actually just purveyors of truth. These things are happening, and this is why you own silver and gold and not get bummed out by the prices. And so, yeah, everything that you're saying is 100% correct. And, look, I will put an exclamation point on it by saying, look, we've already delivered over 200 million ounces off of COMEX this year. The biggest money in the world agrees with you. And the rest of the people who think they're in the right place, I think will wake up one day and see this type of reset, and the price will have gotten away from them. And that's going to be too bad. But it's not so much the price getting higher, it's what is everything else like when silver is trading at $300, $400, $500, $1,000, gold at 8 or 9 or 10,000. What does that say for the dollar, for the economy, for everything? So, yeah, I think that this is done specifically so that the big money can position themselves into silver and gold before there is that reset, before things change to reflect what I think you and I really do believe.
But Andy, with all of that said, for people who do want to purchase silver, can you remind us again what that special was and how they can get information if they do have any questions and would like some more info?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. So we'll do the 2021 Silver Britannias for your listeners at $3.75 over the price of silver. I'd like them to email me personally at info@milesfranklin. And we will reply back with a current inventory sheet. We're also going to offer the 2021 Australian kangaroos, and those are going to be at $3.95 over the price of silver. So between the kangaroos and the Britannias, these are brand new. They're in stock. And any questions your listeners have, please feel free to drop an email and request to speak with me, and I will personally reply back to all of your listeners to make sure that they're getting their questions answered and the best price.
Well, I sure appreciate that. I think people are going to have fun finding out what the price of silver goes to when all these shenanigans are resolved, which, when you think about how there were protests the last 2 weekends around the globe of people saying that they don't want governments deciding what people are putting in their bodies, certainly forcing their ability and freedom to travel, I think a lot of good things on the horizon, and we will look forward to checking back in with you again soon.
Can't wait to see you in October, Chris, and I'm always here when you want to chat. Great to hear your voice, and stay well. Thanks again.